Okay, I think we are probably good to kick off. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. We're thrilled to have you all. This webinar, I guess, has come on the back of many of our customers and their feedback on their struggles around capturing data from their supply chain for reliable Scope 3 reporting. And we know there's two main problems, I guess, with capturing data across your supply chain. And that tends to be the time and resource in your team to reach out to your supply chain, but also then building that understanding and capacity within your supply chain around the metrics and the data that you actually require for your reporting. And to ensure that your supply chain understands what's expected of them. Today, we are very fortunate and lucky to have Gillian and Sally here from GIRAFFE Associates, a trusted partner of SustainIQ, who have recently been delivering a pilot program to help companies to get their house in order, set strategy and targets, and most importantly, tackle the blockers that we mentioned there earlier to build capacity within their supply chain partners when it comes to ESG. And we'll hear a wee bit more about that a wee bit later. Please do get your questions ready throughout this webinar. We're going to keep it really, really informative. At the beginning, we'll just talk a wee bit about the context, the drivers, and what the challenges look like for a lot of our customers. And then I'm going to have a chat with Gillian and Sally, really focused around the learnings that they have on the back of their engagement with suppliers and with customers, like our within our supply chain as well. And then at the end, I'm going to talk a wee bit about how technology can help your businesses to streamline that interaction with your supply chain. And Gillian and Sally will talk a bit more about what does it practically look like engaging with your supply chain. And that's really important for us today. We wanted to bring you something on this webinar that you can go away after this, not just toolkits or resources, that we're actually showing you this is practically something that has been tested and tried across real customers of ours, and how that has helped them, and what you can take away from that yourselves as well. So I guess especially when we're looking at industries like construction, manufacturing, IT, and FMCG, the Scope 3 impacts can often actually be more than those that they have control over. And there, in recent times, has been a real push from top down. Customers need that reporting on transparent product carbon reporting and impacts. And also what we've seen is, the new mandatory and emerging climate reporting rules that really include climate risk in your supply chain as well. And it's virtually impossible to assign a climate risk factor to your supply chain if you don't have a handle on what that looks like. So we'll talk a wee bit more about that later. I guess as well, what we're seeing is from an investor perspective and a funder perspective, they're really looking at decarbonisation plans that encompass supply chain wide now. And it's important to pinpoint emission hotspots so we can prioritise reduction efforts, especially, we find a lot of our customers now have a really good handle on Scope 1 and 2. They're looking at Scope 3, but Scope 3 is so broad that we want to be able to pick what's material and what's achievable, and to set real and tangible targets where we can work with our supply chain partners to actually prioritize those reduction efforts. On the back of that, once we know where we can make the most impact, our procurement teams can then utilize that data to start to bring that into sourcing decisions. And it becomes particularly important for the likes of our customers in the Republic of Ireland, for example, who now have the CBAM rules to deal with as well. So, where they're going to be penalised with carbon taxes for sourcing outside of the EU. So again, there's a real opportunity there to start utilising that data to source local. And then I suppose, you know, up until now, companies have really been looking at Scope 3 reporting from a cost and a spend-based methodology. But we have seen a real shift where our customers are looking for that real supplier-specific data. And again, that allows them to be more prescriptive for their industries as well, rather than using a wide brushstroke from the cost-based perspective. And I guess looking at all of those things, then ultimately we have to report, and we have to be able to stand over what we're reporting on. And there's quite a lot of standardization of data in order to make it auditable. And we need to be able to produce methodologies, workflows, and data in the right format that we can stand over those climate disclosures. So I'm just going to hand it over to Sally now to talk a wee bit about what that looks like from a regulatory perspective.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you. Yeah, so as Maria was talking about there in the introduction, you can see that there is a significant challenge when we're looking at our SME suppliers. And this is very much identified in that trickle effect that you can see there as this top-down flow of information. But for an SME supplier, for example, in manufacturing or construction, that we're primarily seeing, it feels like this sort of wave of information requests. And we see that from their perspective as not this legal responsibility to ensure compliance, because they're potentially not within that remit for reporting, but more specifically about how can they remain on the preferred supplier list. And this kind of continued pressure that we're seeing in our discussions and with our clients. So yeah, I mean, you have the regulators that are setting the rules, but they're not holding the data. And the large corporates are really sort of seen as those middlemen within that. And they are translating those laws, like the UK Procurement Act, into contractual requirements. So for example, you know, you might have a tier 1 contractor. So a regulation like the UK Procurement Act, it isn't just like a legal kind of footnote, but it's an absolute requirement, as Maria had alluded to earlier, that they cannot award a contract to a supplier that doesn't have a carbon reduction plan. But also for SMEs, you know, at the base of that, they're the ones that are doing the heavy lifting. So they're being hit with audit requirements, information requests from multiple clients. And that creates a reporting drain for that business, which can impact on their production efficiencies, but also apply significant pressure. But also don't forget that many SMEs don't necessarily employ a sustainability specialist and often rely on the role for data gathering and communication back to the client via their compliance or quality teams, if they even have a dedicated person or team available to do this. But we also see one of the biggest things that we see in this pressure for information back up to the client is that often during the tender process, the information that's being supplied to the client can vary and will be dependent on the tender request. And in some situations, isn't actually built into how the company operates. And again, this is a risk there with the likes of the Procurement Act tightening up claims around social value commitments and carbon reduction commitments. This gap is now closing. Maria, do you mind moving on to the next slide? Yeah. Sorry, Maria, could you move on to the next slide 6? Oh, sorry.
You guys seen that?
Yep. Yes, that's it. Perfect. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. And so, for example, you know, if you look at you know, the PPN, Procurement Policy Note 621, that applies to all central government contracts, the value over 5 million or more per annum. As I mentioned there earlier, suppliers must provide a carbon reduction plan. Now, as a larger organisation, you will likely have that. You'll have a sustainability strategy and you'll have your pathway to net zero defined. However, even if an SME isn't bidding for the contract directly, their tier one or their main contractor who is bidding will be demanding this data from their entire supply chain to satisfy their own carbon reduction plan. And therein lies a challenge. So through our work advising and supporting companies on their sustainability journeys, we recognize this growing challenge regarding supply chain engagement. And we have identified a clear need for a collaborative cluster, which is our supply chain program, that moves away from that top-down approach to bring together suppliers and their key customers and clients. And we're really acting as a bridge to support and educate whilst helping those suppliers and our anchor clients to develop systems and procedures to build that data that helps the cluster to build a transparent value chain. And I think it's important in the next slide, Maria, to actually talk about some of the findings that we found during the early days of our research whilst we developed the program. So what you're seeing there on that slide may be surprising to some, but we found that this was clearly evident throughout our research, that there are significant gaps, specifically within their SME suppliers, around, so if we look at the environmental piece, for tracking scope 1 and 2 emissions. Just over half of the companies don't track that information. And that's obviously key scope 3 data going up the chain to their clients. Or tracking that energy consumption, again, a high percentage not doing that. But also 60% not tracking water or waste. And this is key information that helps to build data and knowledge and understanding for the SME supplier, also cost savings for them to build efficiency into their working practice, but also is really key information for their client, for their main contractor. So as you can see there, some of those stats there are quite compelling. And around the social piece as well, and we look at that social value agenda, maybe no formal health and well-being policy. Over half of our SMEs engaged didn't have a robust system in place, or they have an informal approach to social value. So we're seeing a lot of sort of ad hoc reactive response within maybe tender applications. And we see this reflected in the background data for these SMEs. So thank you, Maria.
Great. So I have the very nice opportunity now to pick the brains of Gillian and Sally around some of the learnings, I guess, that they've taken from that supply chain pilot. So Sally, based on the research feedback from the sustainable supply chain pilot, you found that scope 3 is actually just one part of a much larger struggle. What is the biggest misconception that you found whilst dealing with that relationship between large companies and their suppliers when it comes to actually meeting those broad sustainability demands?
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, there were quite a few things that came to light, but I would say one of the big things is that biggest misconception is that from the SME point of view, is viewing the data request as a one-off administrative burden, for a specific tender or client, running around trying to make sure they have a piece in for social value or for their environmental commitments, employee commitments in that particular contract, local employment. But they see it as an external chore and often react with a quick fix mindset. And that's not the same for all SMEs. And I'm talking generally here. But the reality is that the burden only really exists because the internal systems aren't yet in place. And when you have the infrastructure to track your own energy and waste, you aren't just ready for the next tender, you're operating a more efficient, profitable company. So the data for the client then becomes, the byproduct of your own sort of strive to be doing better and not an extra task on your to-do list. So what our program really was looking at was identifying this and working to bridge the gap to support the suppliers within the cluster and also the anchor clients, i.e. maybe the construction company or the advanced manufacturer, to help engage, because what we would also see is engagement was often lacking between the large client the large corporate and their smaller supplier. It's just send me the information, but not really engaging and forming a good collaborative relationship.
Yeah, and I think, of course, Sally, that ultimately fosters the ability within the SME to actually be stronger within the market, you know. So the reality is, you know, those smaller SMEs, they're pushed for time. Their mindset is that, oh, we're having to report on this because we're being asked for it. But it's that change in mindset that we need to bring about, that actually if you put these mechanisms in place and you start to make this part of how you do business, you have the ability to be a stronger proposition in future tenders, that those main contractors are going to want to work with you over the others at the same level that don't have these mechanisms in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And that consistency, and that's why obviously Gillian and I within GIRAFFE are passionate about, empowering and supporting SMEs to develop their sustainability focus and framework so that they can be consistent and look at it as a commercial advantage, not just a kind of nice to have that sits aside.
So for me, a takeaway from that is there's almost two actions that need to happen here if the industry is going to go in the right way. Is the SMEs need to view this as it's an improvement process internally, but the larger main contractors or corporates need to understand that they can't just put that burden down on the SMEs without bringing them along on the journey and helping to build that capacity.
Absolutely. Even the knowledge and understanding that the larger corporate would often have, that requirement onto the SME, they don't understand the language, and we would often start by an educational piece to bring them up to a level of understanding that their main contractors are already across.
Brilliant. And Gillian, Sally mentioned the new Procurement Act, and we see between that and contract clauses coming into play, what is one practical action that a supplier can take today to ensure that they aren't screened out of future tenders?
It's hard to kind of drill down to just one action. But I suppose for me, what I've seen time and again over the years is the benefit of education and training and engagement of staff. So, upskilling the team when it comes to sustainability, because regulations, tender requirements, client expectations are all on the rise. But companies that succeed aren't necessarily the ones that have the fanciest policies or reports. They're the ones who have the staff who understand how to collect good data, how to make good decisions, how to evidence what they're already doing. So giving them that training for, even an hour to the people who actually buy materials, run sites, manage transport, oversee supply chains is going to repay itself kind of 10 times over in compliance and resilience and tender success.
Yeah, I do think what we're seeing working with, I guess, subcontractors of the main contractors we work with as well, is there's started to become this realization that this is a commercial problem. And I think that's actually the best thing that could happen here, because look, we all know things move ahead. When regulation comes on board and there's a stick to someone's back, things happen quickly. But like Sally said, the stick isn't necessarily to the back of the subcontractors yet. But from their point of view, we need to start talking that language to them. And I would urge, I guess, the larger corporates and the main contractors, for instance, to talk to their supply chains to say, we will be looking more favorably on working with subcontractors or SMEs that have their house in order here, and view it as more of a commercial move than we know you don't have to do this right now. And I think there's that real opportunity once the senior management of the smaller SMEs understand it's a corporate decision, then it's communicated back down to the people that are actually at operations level that will be needed to do the reporting, and get away from that mindset that, oh God, they're asking me to do another new thing here, because what we've seen time and time again, once it becomes part and parcel of what you do every day, it only takes a short amount of time for that change management piece to take over, and it just becomes a routine, I guess, in what they're reporting.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose what we've been saying to clients when the likes of CSRD reporting has kind of been rolled back a little and doesn't apply to as many companies directly now, going forward, don't see that as a, okay, we can push the stop button over here. See it as an opportunity to actually get your house in order in the way that is most suitable for your business, as opposed to simply to tick a box to comply with regulations, so that when it does come back round again, and it will, or else, as you say, what we are seeing is more and more kind of commercial pressure being put on for these rather than regulatory, then you're ready to respond, and you're not wasting time. As Sally alluded to earlier, kind of scrabbling around for every tender, trying to put information together. You've got a solid foundation and a solid base there, and it's easy, it's quick, it's efficient, and you're not going to get screened out because you're under pressure at the last minute and don't have the data available.
Yeah. And Sally, the pilot program results, like you had on screen there with the percentages, it's kind of eye-watering, really. For instance, that 60% of companies aren't tracking waste and water. When you see a gap like that, what is the first step that you guys in GIRAFFE take to help a company to build that capacity without feeling like it is that administrative burden?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, those results are really compelling, and I think that's uh, key to understanding the challenge here. So within GIRAFFE and within my expertise in waste and resource efficiency, for me, that's the real gold piece of data, because you're looking at that and going, gosh, so much information is bound within how you consume energy and how you generate waste or a resource, that I would look at that. And it's really understanding that in granular detail. So, I mean, in your simplest form, when you're looking at energy consumption, that's often obviously bound between the finance department, maybe through invoicing. But if you look at it in a more granular scale in a manufacturing firm, for example, that's looking at, there's real benefit through having smart metering data and actually analyzing plant and equipment efficiencies and shift patterns, startup, shutdown times that can really save money. It can really save and have significant efficiencies that will help production and help the costs around, especially when we're energy critical on the bottom line. And then if we're looking at waste is often kind of sits aside, and there's so much value in the data around how waste is generated, whether it's through a production process, whether it's through segregation, whether it's through a commitment of zero waste to landfill. You've got to understand the path at which that waste is generated, what it is, what's the weight, what's the tonnage, the value, and where is it going. So for me, looking at that, it's an ideal opportunity, and we do this within our program to look at waste auditing and actually drilling down to identify the traceability of the waste stream and looking at opportunities, because often that waste as a resource has a value applicable to it as well. And companies can often be missing out either through being compliant, through packaging regulations and extended producer responsibility, or on the materials that they're consuming, i.e. single-use plastic. And we look at ways in which to reduce that and incorporate more recycled product or reduce consumption generally, as well as looking ways in which you can improve that circularity of materials and that environmental impact. And on the energy side, by doing those audits and looking at consumption, then you can try to build an understanding that helps them within their production efficiencies and bottom line cost.
So that's interesting. So you're trying to take the focus off of administrative burden to what are the opportunities by actually
Absolutely.
understanding your data and what this is actually showing you.
Absolutely. There's been plenty of business that companies that I've worked for over the years, where they will often say, well, we fully understand how much energy we consume and we know our shift pattern and so on, but maybe they don't apply a smart metering approach. And when they do that and they look at that data over a 3-month or 6-month period, there is always, I would say 99% of the time, a saving to be made, not only just a cost saving, but a knowledge efficiency to be understood. And again, if we're looking at developing scope 1 and 2 data internally within a business, that then is reliant for the clients reliant upon as accurate scope 3 data, then that's also important. And we look at that within the waste management as well of materials. That data is vital also upstream to the client as well.
Yeah, I think as well, we're seeing a lot of our customers who may be main contractors or corporates reaching out to their SME partners. And the result is, in quite a lot of them, panic, because there may be small outfits, and more often than not, we're asking them for quite a lot of data as they view it. And they don't know where to start. And I suppose that's one takeaway I have from working with this as well, is that before we ever go out asking for the information, I think we need to have a really honest conversation with our supply chain so that they're not panicking. And actually we'll say, this can be, these are the expectations from our tier 1 contractors, for instance. These are, if you're sitting in this group, we understand you might not have all this data, but here are the 4 points of data we absolutely need right now. Next year we're going to be asking you for this next piece. So I think that's, and honestly, I think that's maybe one of the biggest bridges we need to figure out how to bridge that gap, because I find that a lot of the corporates and main contractors are potentially, with the amount of data they're asking for at one time, the fear from the subcontractor is, am I not going to be able to work for this company anymore? And that's not where you want to be. You want to be encouraging local supply chain, not freezing them out because it's too much of a burden, or it's an administrative hassle right now. Gillian, would you have any practical kind of advice on how you could communicate that? Would you see people having workshops, or how would that work?
So I suppose with the supply chain program that we did, we just to set the context for that, we started that because we were seeing the larger companies that we were working with on sustainability strategy, etc. They would set their targets. They would map out what it was they intended to do to become more sustainable and meet net zero targets, etc. But when they then started to engage with the supply chain, because the supply chain is absolutely key in meeting those targets, they were finding a lot of suppliers not on the journey, didn't know where to start, just as you said. And the research that we did at the start was to find out, well, what are some of the challenges that you're facing as a client company in engaging suppliers? And then we went on after that to find out what some of the challenges were for the suppliers. And a big one was time and resource within the client company to actually do that engagement. So the understanding was there that they needed to bring the suppliers along on the journey, but they just didn't have the time or capacity or understanding of what that looked like. And for the supplier organizations, they kind of knew they needed to get on the journey as well, but they didn't really know where to start. So that was where we thought, well, let's look at a cluster approach, bring the client company and some of its key suppliers, but not necessarily the ones with the biggest spend, the ones that actually needed the support and help more to upskill and build their capacity. And whilst we kind of started out on this to help the client companies, it very quickly became apparent that this is going to be very beneficial for the suppliers more broadly, because it's going to give them the understanding, the capacity to go for other contracts, just as you kind of alluded to earlier. But I suppose in terms of the simple steps, we incorporated some training sessions, etc., some toolkits, some resources. I guess if you were wondering kind of where do you start, just pulling together a simple kind of compliance pack that you've got available there to tailor if needed for certain situations. But looking at your environmental management, if you don't have ISO 14001 or another system in place, then having documented the process for how you manage water waste and energy, how you are going to reduce carbon, etc., and who's responsible for that. So in a lot of cases, it's just that the things aren't documented. It's not that they're not happening in a lot of cases, but the documentation, the evidence isn't there. And in some cases, the data might be being gathered, but it's not really, they don't really know how to analyze or interpret it or use it to inform their decision making. So it's getting those kind of simple first steps in place on the environmental side, and then on the social side. We know that companies are being asked for more information about what they're doing in terms of their own people, health and well-being, training, employing locally and contracting locally, and what they're doing on diversity and inclusion. So again, it doesn't have to be widely sophisticated, it just needs to be documented to start with, and then it can be built on. So it's getting those foundations. Could I ask, we had a poll that we would love to put up to find out what the audience for this webinar sees as some of the biggest challenges they have in engaging suppliers. Could we look at that?
Absolutely. It's up on screen for everybody now. So if you wouldn't mind answering that. So which of the following is the single most important goal for your supply chain sustainability journey over the next 18 months? Getting clear data for Scope 3 reporting, supporting our social value commitments, providing EPDs on products which we buy, which are the environmental product declarations for materials, and doing thorough mapping to understand potential risks, if you could.
Yeah, because that transparency piece for the client companies is just at its very, very earliest stages for most companies. And as they start to do that mapping and start to build on the engagement a little more, then that's where the weaknesses, I guess, come out in terms of the supplier data and processes that they have in place. But it really should be a journey that clients and suppliers go on together.
And I think it's great, like that, in a way, in that pilot, the client companies that you were working with brought you in to lift that burden off them to be able to run that program and see it through. And I totally understand, like, we would have customers that would say to us, yeah, we know what we should be doing, but we need to pull together some sort of a training program here, and we don't have the time or resource to do that. So look, it's amazing that you guys have tried and tested that, and I'm sure taking a lot of learnings to make it a heck of a lot better. So that's interesting. Our top result there is to get clear data for Scope 3 reporting. 68%, 20% came back supporting our social value commitments, and then 12% doing thorough mapping to understand the potential risks.
Yeah, and again, just on the Scope 3 reporting, again, there's a benefit there for client and supplier, because what we found was most of the suppliers hadn't started to measure their own Scope 1 and 2 themselves. And they didn't have that kind of baseline understanding of where they were and then what they could do. But by helping them to do that and making that simple process, then that fed up to the client companies as well. So everyone benefited from that.
So that leads nicely, I think, into talking about efficiencies, because we've just spoken about the time and resource capability there. So I'm going to just chat a wee bit about how technology can help. And for those of you that are new to SustainIQ on this webinar, SustainIQ is an all-in-one ESG reporting software platform. And ultimately, we help customers to measure, monitor, and report on social, environmental, and economic performance. And we do that across 4-pillar approach. So responsible procurement does what it says in the tin. It's usually the procurement team, buyers and QSs that engage with this side of the platform. It's really looking at what is your local economic value from your supply chain, what are the supply chain risks within that. In pillar 2 is your environmental management, so waste, water, energy, biodiversity, carbon reduction, and then pillars 3 and 4 are your social value pillars. So pillar 3, people, health and diversity, is really looking inwardly. What am I doing with my own staff? Training, health and well-being, apprenticeships, placements, equality, diversity and inclusion. And then pillar 4 is looking out into the community. So that community investment, charitable donations, volunteering, responsible leadership, and educational engagements that we have there as well. But I guess, you know, when we're looking at the conversation that we're having today and how we're helping customers to run that engagement with their supply chain more efficiently, it's that having that single source of truth in one platform where all the requests, data capture and storage of the supplier emissions data and wider governance data is pulled into the one system. We automate that data collection through online portals or APIs, so that automation between systems, and we can put out customized questionnaires as well. All of those are standardized templates, so therefore, you can stand over the validation of answers. They can't complete a form until it is completely filled in the way it's meant to be filled in. We obviously have standardized emissions factors and calculations then in the background as well. We have that audit trail, and it allows you to have that supplier trend analysis then to prioritize that action. But I guess what I wanted to just speak quickly about was the ability that in SustainIQ, we don't view ourselves as a point solution. Okay, there's loads of software systems out there where you put data in and it spits analysis out. What makes us different is that we spend a real serious amount of time mapping data within an organization and looking at what are the workflows to get that data into SustainIQ in as easy way as possible. So this is just an example of a map of some data points that we pull automated into our system. And you'll see there vehicle trackers, access management, so knowing the clock in, clock out times of all of your subcontractors, suppliers, and your own staff on site. What does that look like within their induction records? How are they traveling to site? So we get carbon and we also get social value. So again, we'll be able to say exactly how many hours of apprentice time or full-time employees are spent on site. We also have integration with waste management. So we know that's often a big problem. Like Sally was saying, you're getting lots of different waste management reports in. So we're consolidating those and we're ingesting those easily without your organization having to spend a lot of time manipulating the data there. But most importantly, around this conversation, when we look at supply chain, there's a number of different things that we can do. So talking about product suppliers, we can put out questionnaires, customized questionnaires to them, asking them their pre-qual questions. So anything you have around what certifications do you have? Do you have modern slavery statements? What's the breakdown of your workforce to get that EDI breakdown that you might need for your regulatory reporting? What is their, do they measure scope 1 and 2? What is their scope 1 and 2 emissions? What's their turnover from last year? So that kind of information allows us to feed that back through and utilize that for reporting for the client company. Within that, we can also ask about the materials that you're procuring from them. So we can send the list of the materials you're procuring and asking them directly through the system in an automated approach. What are the EPDs for this? Do you have EPDs? Uploading those documents so that we have the evidence behind it. They fill in that form, press save, and it comes all back into SustainIQ for you to view in your profile. Outside of that then, we are also looking at the subcontractors you use. So those SMEs that the guys are working with on the supply chain program. And we know the problem for you is that you spend a lot of time without having workflows or utilizing technology. You'll be emailing them monthly. You'll be sending them spreadsheets. They're half filling in spreadsheets. You're not getting half the data that you need. You're maybe not getting any data back. You're chasing them constantly. So what we've created is a form that's automated, sent out monthly from SustainIQ, a tabbed form where they upload that information. Again, it's validated, so they must fill out specific fields that are needed. And we also have the evidence there as well, so they can upload that evidence that if you're getting audited for BREEAM or for other purposes, you can have that sitting behind it. So, and that's all automated, and you don't even need to do the chasing. So we set up reminders and alerts that go out to those subcontractors. So again, listening to our customers, we're trying to remove that administrative burden from the client company especially, and make it a lot easier for the SME to report, because it's all very clear what you need to report on. And we would help our client companies to run training sessions as well to make sure they know how to fill these various different things in. So I'm going to hand over to the guys here at GIRAFFE to talk a wee bit more about what they do in general, and then in more detail about the program.
Okay, thanks, Maria. Yeah, so we are sustainability consultants, ESG, and we work across a number of areas. A lot of our clients tend to be in the construction manufacturing sector, probably because a lot of the pressure for reporting and strategy is on those sectors as well. So between us, I hate this stat, but between us, we do have over 50 years of combined experience. So working in whether that's corporate responsibility, or Sally is kind of expert in the waste and resource efficiency side of things, and compliance, etc. So we help with strategy development, help companies to interpret the data that they get from SustainIQ and understand what they can do with that, how they can use that to set targets and goals to become a more efficient, a more sustainable, more resilient company. We offer training, support if they want to go through the process to become a B corporation, etc. And the list of, we work with clients across all of those sectors. Just the next slide, Maria, please. So on the supply chain program that we piloted last year, we worked with two companies, one manufacturing, one construction, and between them about 15, 16 suppliers. And we had really good feedback on that program because, as I alluded to earlier, the suppliers kind of knew this was a journey they needed to get on. They just needed the support and the nudge, I guess, to get on the journey. And the client companies knew they needed to increase their engagement and improve all of that. So it was really about trying to bridge that gap that we knew existed and that our research showed us definitely existed, and helping with that resource. So we did the kind of engagement, the onboarding of the suppliers, helped them with the data collection process, provided training for them around kind of basic sustainability understanding and social value. And we worked with them first to find out where the needs were, of course, and we would do that with any company so that it is very much bespoke to their needs. And it was about just facilitating that knowledge and understanding and helping both client and suppliers along the way, and giving them the tools they needed. So it was a kind of a test. We did learn some things. I guess our key learning was the benefit of bringing them together as a group more often so they could actually share and learn with each other, because in most cases the suppliers were not direct competitors. They were supplying different parts of the business, so that worked particularly well. But yeah, really appreciate the opportunity today to come along and talk about it a bit. Thanks to SustainIQ.
And I suppose as a call to action for any of our own customers, I see there's a few of them on this webinar today. If you're not utilizing the systems that we have in place and the functionality we have in place for the supply chain piece and reaching out, please come and talk to us. For any new people on the call, we'd absolutely relish the opportunity to have a chat about how we can help you with this. And equally, I do think there's quite a number of people that I've spoken to over the last few weeks that are in the same situation, Gillian and Sally, where they know they need to engage with their supply chain, but maybe don't have the time. What we're saying is there's two organizations here. We're more than happy to help and absolutely have a discussion. There's no hold barred or anything there. We'll have a discussion. It's always nice to hear where people are at and see if we can do anything, or if we can't, we'll absolutely signpost to where we can.
Yeah.
I am just conscious there that there might be a few questions coming through the chat. PJ, is there anything there that, or if anybody has any questions that they want to ask, we have a few minutes for that. I know sometimes people don't like to ask questions on this, but again, if there is any questions that you have afterwards, we're more than happy. Our emails and stuff are up there. So we have one here. So what do you see as the role of education and carbon literacy within the supply chain? So again, Sally, you kind of touched on that earlier, that quite a lot of the supply chain, when we're sending out questionnaires and things like that, don't even understand, I guess, the terminology. So it's actually going back to real basics there in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gillian, I know that we were talking about this the other day with one of your long-term clients. Around carbon literacy and around that growing need to actually consider carbon literacy across the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. We're working with a number of companies on this. One construction company in particular that is putting almost all of its staff through carbon literacy training. That's quite a big investment. What we discovered recently as well is that there are one or two large public sector organizations that are now making it a requirement for companies within their supply chain to be carbon literate organizations, which would mean that a proportion of their staff would be trained in carbon literacy. It is an investment. It is a full day's worth of training, but what it does is open employees up to having that understanding of, what do we mean when we talk about scope 1 and 2 emissions and scope 3? What impact are our actions actually having on the world around us, and what can we as individuals and organizations do about that? And certainly what we're seeing is that when organizations do have that investment, that they're much better able to then look at their own strategy and to they understand the language that's coming through in tenders and government regulations a lot better as well. So when staff understand what is involved, it's amazing. They've got to make these pledges about what they're going to do, and some of the actions that come out after the training are really innovative, really eye-opening, and the staff themselves, would never have thought of them without actually having the benefit of that training investment. So definitely one I would recommend. But can I also say that for those that don't feel that a whole 7 hours of training is required for all their staff, we did also produce and have condensed 2-hour versions of the training that aren't certified but still give companies all the basics, and they're tailored to each sector. So I do think training's a really important part of this journey.
Excellent.
And I think just to add to that as well, Maria, just on Gillian's comment, and going back to the discussion about the trickle-down effect at the beginning of the presentation, and how the larger clients, the large corporates set out the contractual requirements. So as Gillian alluded to there, that's becoming more apparent, where to ensure that understanding, it's written in to that contract, to that agreement, so it's trying to empower our suppliers to get onto that, or to be educated before being pushed to have this in place as well.
Yeah. Kevin has come through there with a comment. The biggest challenge is the willingness of parties to collaborate in a competitive environment. However, this is the environment that needs to be focused on, as it involves parties that can make the biggest impact for change to achieve goals. And I couldn't agree more, to be totally honest. And I suppose, there are snippets where we see of that actually happening in practice. And again, like Gillian said, the ability to be able to bring subcontractors together there on that journey within the pilot, where they were able to share. And look, we're not looking for people to share commercially sensitive information. No, it's like sometimes it's like getting the nuclear codes out of people, in especially construction. They don't like to share too much. So I think it's having that openness to know actually we can learn from each other here, and with that collective effort, there's more impact.
And Maria, definitely. I mean, one of the biggest things that we got out of our program when we had our final kind of sit down and we went through the results of our program between our 2 anchor clients and our suppliers around the table, that there were some really good relationships made, and collaborative opportunities between suppliers and our anchor clients, and between the anchor clients as well. So that knowledge share and engagement was really valuable beyond the program that we'd established and implemented.
Well,
Yeah.
some of the most innovative and impactful initiatives that I have seen running through our customers are the initiatives where they also engage the subcontractors on site, and especially from a social value perspective. So we're seeing they're working in particular areas of disadvantage. They engage then with the local supply chain that they have on site, who have a real understanding of the area and are much more engaged with getting involved and helping because they're actually from that area as well, you know, and we really see that there's massive impacts to be had there. But also, I think, you know, I've seen it recently as well from a carbon perspective, where main contractor and subcontractor have gotten together to look at a joint carbon reduction plan for the project at different stages of the build, for instance. So again, looking at where logistics can be tightened and shared rather than you know, having 50 trucks coming to site with deliveries, that they have actually pulled together resources and had less transport coming to site, which is better for the local area as well, you know. So those kind of things, there's definitely an opportunity for better impact. But again, usually the onus to drive that is on the main contractor or the corporate client to try and pull that resource together, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I, you know, just to say on that as well, when looking at net zero in particular, the targets that are out there to be met, yes, individual companies need to have their own target, but there are sectoral targets that need to be met. And unless companies within sectors do start to collaborate and share and increase the impact that they can have, you know, our chances of meeting those sectoral targets are pretty low. And that just puts more pressure on everybody. In that case, so it's thinking about it a little bit differently, perhaps.
So I don't think we have any more questions there. I would like to sincerely thank Gillian and Sally for coming on and offering that, you know, that advice and everything there for us. And I guess if there's any other questions that we haven't got to or that come up from people, Gillian and Sally, I will send them on to you guys to answer specifically. But again, if anybody wants to get in contact, you can get in contact through our website or hello@sustainiq.com, or you can get me on maria@sustainiq.com specifically. And again, for Giraffe Associates, info@giraffeassociates.com as well. And we're all on LinkedIn as well. So please do add us. We like to add to our networks. And sincerely thank you all for joining us today. Look, we wanted to keep it really informative, practical, and snappy so that you aren't hanging about all day. So I think we'll leave it there. And thank you all very much.
Thanks, Maria.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.